Blue. 2. This is Java 13. Boarding denied. The agreed time has been missed. The cold and lifeless voice from below seemed to suck out all the positive emotions and good memories, like that Dementor from the Eternal movie about a very arrogant boy magician. Java 13, arrived as soon as I could, I muttered, trying to find a place for myself. I have traffic jams. Blue 2, boarding denied. Your argument is ridiculous and ridiculous. Well then, I have pause. I tried again. Blue 2, boarding denied. As well as having a sense of humor. I won't give you a loan, damn Java. I raised my voice and leaned over the table, or I'm going to chew your face off. There was a chuckle from below, and Nick finally moved away, giving way. I sat down, put down the menu, what I didn't see there, I know everything I need by heart, and pressed the button, calling the staff. He ordered tequila and smoked meats for the metal cylinder that rolled up, admired how it was ridiculously unfolding on a platform that was too small for him, and turned to the table. We were sitting in the traditional Our Java bar, where we regularly gathered, being not on contracts. We are, in fact, the captain and proud owner of 70%. The rest are at the bank, let the fire spill on its steps, of the ship with the romantic name Blue 2. Well, I have no imagination, what can I do? My assistant Grisha and Nick, although everyone called him not so a sleeve to the bridle. This walking misunderstanding, which only by the oversight of the higher powers lived up to its age, came to us and proudly called itself a bosun, however, without explaining in any way why it is needed on a modern ship. He was of no use on board. He only ate, slept, periodically ruffled our nerves and wasted water. His only plus was really great coffee. Well, he could also, without falsely, whistle the tune Flight of the Valkyries or Samaragorodok, but this always happened absolutely in a random period of time and never suited the situation. But what we haven't hit him for yet is that Nick knew everything, always and about everyone. And, using this considerable power, he always found us contracts, sometimes very fat ones. The other side of his incredibly huge social circle was alcoholism and a great weakness for social gatherings. At first, when we left for contracts, we left him on the ground, and each time we were amazed at his talent to disappear. Until, in the end, they found him right near Baikonur, where Nick was sitting on the outdoor terrace of an extremely shabby-looking eatery, looking at the starry sky and literally howling. After that, they vowed to leave this matter to chance and drag their half-helpless torso home. And Nick already fell on Grisha's shoulder on the plane and cried that he wanted to surf space, but no one would take him without education, and moreover, any higher than school, without connections, where necessary, and even, which is absolutely out of the question, without his ship. Grisha listened patiently, periodically pitifully weighed him bream when he began to drool completely, and slowly boozed him with vodka hidden in the bracelet so that Nick would not fall asleep. Because then he wouldn't have woken up, even if he had fired a cannon at them. Grisha was the exact opposite of him. A tall, sturdy man in his early 40s, with noble gray at the temples and sideburns shaved in the latest fashion, solid, always in a perfectly pressed shirt and trousers, and deeply and hopelessly married. Reliable as a rock, executive as a robot, hardy as a camel, in general, almost an ideal employee. But only his wife, weighing more than her husband by 1.5 times, and with a character not inferior to a pack of hungry hyenas, bullied him so much that, in my opinion, he soon had to completely forget how to make decisions and choose. I'm almost sure that he came here first, but he sat and waited for at least someone without choosing anything, and then stupidly repeated Nick's order. But, to be honest, I was very comfortable with him. Well, I am the captain, the leader, and that's all. the only ray of adequacy in this veil of sadness, alcoholism, and spiritual sorrow. Although Nick calls me Judas, a corner of stuffiness and sarcasm, but he envies me, I know for sure. The drinking buddies were clearly still sober and bright-minded, well, as far as possible, so I immediately attacked Nick. "Well, are there any contracts?" "There are always contracts." He turned his nose up at the ceiling. "Smart people will always find a job." "I'm going to kick you in the shin," I warned politely. "And, on the other hand, Grisha will also add, and he is clearly not wearing sneakers like me, it will hurt you very much." The nose sank into its rightful place, but skinny knees and blue synthetic trousers immediately lifted up to it. A disgrace he earns normally. Although, I wouldn't be surprised if he's already spent the last fee, he'll be fine. As a man with a fair amount of stupidity, he could start saving up for a museum named after himself, where he would collect everything he stole from drunken eyes. He once stuttered about this. Drink banally, treating everyone around, or take a new course on how to become happy and rich. I still had enough money. For a couple of months it was definitely possible not to starve and pay off the loan, but I was drawn up there. Not everyone understood me, even those who had been among the stars, but it's a feeling when you're alone on the bridge. The crew is asleep, and there are millions of billions of light years of space around. Black, heterogeneous, with tailed spots of nearby comets and the cold glow of distant ice giants. And even a very modest display of only 102 inches does not prevent you from feeling all the greatness and splendor of this moment. And just to hang around for the atmosphere, please, I'm too adequate to spend so much on my own pleasures. Grisha, on the other hand, was completely deaf to space, but he was eager for every contract, as if he were not even stronger than me. At least, I was wondering if he would fight off finances, risks, time, and all that. But this one was ready not to get out for months. He told everyone that he was saving up for his own ship, but personally I suspected that he just didn't want to go home. But I didn't climb, of course. Maybe this is normal. Where do I get into such things? And Nick loved space, but absolutely not reciprocally. His skinny body couldn't handle overload very well. Interestingly, only when sober, but it was worth a drink, and like a cucumber. Therefore, all three of us have long been accustomed to wearing bracelets with various intoxicants, in case a fixed-term contract falls, and there will be no familiar girls in the commission at the spaceport. Then we pumped Nick up after passing the medics and screening, because it's better for him to be talkative beyond measure and drunk than sober, silent, and vomiting. While I was pressing Nick, the robot waiter brought a tray with what he ordered, looked at me blankly with blue eyepieces, depicted a smile on a tiny display in the middle of the case. It is immediately clear that our production. Why is this kind of mouth located there? And he twitched again, turning around on the spot. After looking sternly at the interlocutor, I hit him on the hand reaching for the bottle and repeated the question. Yes, there are contractors, even a few. Some are generally fat, but your trough will not pull, neither in range nor in weight. Nick sighed heavily, taking up a normal position at the table. It will be optimal to go to the Kazakh brothers. There are 3 standard pallets, it seems. Seeds and a little bit of firewood are sent to their own on clay, and they pay the full rate. I would take it. I thought about it. It was always hard to work in January. The Earthlings, at the beginning of the 22nd century, somehow suddenly spread tentacles colonies over a considerable number of more or less accessible planets, extracting all sorts of useful things and almost ending on their rapidly decrepit home planet, predictably dragged away many earthly habits and customs, one of which remained the celebration of the New, the Year, and Christmas. In this regard, December was regularly overly active for all carriers, sometimes bringing in more than the previous few months combined. And January, accordingly, was rotten for contracts. Everyone managed to pull everything apart before the holidays. No, there were, of course, rational people who waited for the end of the hype and then offered board carriers to work cheaply. They know, infections, that many get hooked on flights, like on drugs, and use them. So often it turned out that, although he did not earn money, he also admired the prickly cold lights of distant stars and the burning blackness of emptiness at his own expense. And the last few years in the beloved eternal and unconquered homeland for KK, Cosmo Cargo, carriers in other words. Who came up with such an abbreviation would have strangled, but it was too late. It took root even before I was born. Even more difficult times came. Sworn friends from overseas imposed another restriction when they sensed a threat to their commercial fleet. The official reason was that Russia allegedly did not market and completely shamelessly strangled the space industry in neighboring Kazakhstan. But everyone understood perfectly well that the blessed United States of America, the United States of North America, that is, a century ago, at some point, the old USA decided that it was enough to hide the obvious, and teamed up with Canada and northern Mexico, got tired of the competition for the European transportation market, and made a night's move. Moreover, interestingly, the Americans themselves recently crushed the EU spacecraft, the European Union Space Agency, much more roughly, and did not even scratch themselves. And Russia just stopped using Baikonur, which it had not needed for a long time, which now somehow made ends meet at the expense of handouts from China. It is good that the motherland managed to establish a considerable number of its colonies over the fat years, and all sorts of small states and entities did not shy away from sending goods through us, straightening out almost completely official papers on behalf of the Russian embassies in their countries, so as not to run into a menacing shout from overseas. In general, there was enough for bread, sometimes even with butter. You can intercept more Arabs. They have 4 pallets, just under your blue one, but they pay the same amount, and you need to carry on. Nick continued meanwhile, looking sadly at the tequila in my hands. Yes, and I don't like them, damn it. Understand what they carry there. Then the whole body will have to be cleaned like in summer. What's Grisha like? I looked at him. Your favorite. 6687. Nick chuckled, and Grisha nodded silently. 667 is good. At least the temperature is normal there and oxygen is produced in sufficient quantities. At 581C, for example, they found absolutely insane reserves of helium-3 at both poles, and also practically on the surface. And when they went there to mine, lithium-7 was found very close, without which modern cosmonautics was unthinkable. And the KK caravans reached out to a not very distant but terribly uncomfortable planet. And we've been there once, so much so that we don't want to anymore. The atmosphere is completely destroyed. It's cold, crazy magnetic anomalies. Well, in general, such earnings. I nodded thoughtfully, but still continued to ask about all possible clients. As the only one who didn't throw in yesterday's gatherings, Nick volunteered to oversee the loading himself. This is not a particularly troublesome matter. Take the goods on the invoice, seal them, and sit on the power beam at the top of the body, and shout at the movers, and then check all the fasteners, give the command to the onboard AI to fix it, and that's it, you're free. But it usually took a decent amount of time, and there was an awful lot of dust there. Therefore, both Grisha and I, having happily dumped an unpleasant case on an impoverished comrade, sat in a clean spaceport building and drank coffee, eating it with pretty cookies in the form of planets colonized by Russia. Behind the transparent wall of the cafe, there were concrete paths along which short-bellied tractor robots dragged booster blocks back and forth. Some huge gray bales, huge bright red tankers drove twice. The port lived its own, active and completely incomprehensible life for most. even in the quiet months. And then, about a kilometer away, there were the pillars of the launch pads. The first one was free, and on the second one I could see the silhouette of my ship, an almost rectangular box of silver color, with a pointed wide nose and long sooty paws, between which the cargo compartment was attached, and the launch boosters were now docked to them from the outside. The design was not particularly beautiful. It did not even look elegant, but I sincerely loved it like nothing else. It was she who brought me to a place where I could be happy. Well, she brought money, which is also important, although so far almost half of the income went to pay off the loan for her. "That's how much I fly with you. I still can't figure it out," Grisha said lazily. "Why blue too? And why not?" I replied in the same tone. The argument, of course, is weighty. But he's never even been blue. He's been silver all the way. And the deuce, where did it come from? Favorite grade at school? "Fee on you, I studied well. Just blue, and that's it. What's bothering you? It hasn't bothered you for 7 years, and now you suddenly do. Are you getting old?" He shook his gray head impressively, waved his hand, and fell silent again. We sat in magnificent silence for about 20 minutes, until there was a buzz in my ear. Nick notified me that everything was ready to be shipped. The inspection and medical examination were carried out without delay. They found an empty ramp and rolled on it to the launch pad, like kings, sitting high and looking far away. Nick met us inside, in his armchair, quietly whistling some new and unfamiliar melody. A voice from the speaker mumbled permission to take off. I confirmed it to the onboard AI, and the legs of the holders crunched away from below. After that, accelerators roared furiously somewhere in the same place, and the cold light of the air-ozonating diodes disappeared, replaced by an alarmingly red emergency backlight. And immediately I was pressed into a chair. My insides twisted, my eyes went dark from the sudden overload, and it went on for a monstrously long time. But the worst thing was later, when the launch boosters fell off and parachuted down, and we went out of the atmosphere. All the unpleasant effects disappeared at once, doing it so abruptly that if my vestibular apparatus were weaker, the cookies would have been paid for nothing. But it was tolerable. That's when we take off from Grisha. It will be worse. There, the planet is almost 6 times heavier than Earth and lets go of itself much more reluctantly. Sigh, the image on the screen. The handle, priority. I ordered loudly, barely calming my inner frustration and calling the control stick from the armrest. Flight mode, garbage dump. "Acknowledged, my captain." A pleasant voice purred from the speakers. Most of the pilots passed the near orbit completely in automatic mode. Modern artificial intelligences could quite cope with dodging ships from a huge amount of debris near the planet. But when I figured out the manual controls, I always hedged my bets. The AI could ignore some little thing that would not damage the ship, but would easily splatter one or even several surveillance cameras. And then, some block of images will fall out from not the largest display, which was unacceptable. We made our way at a snail's pace for a long time, more than half an hour. Every year, the ring of garbage around the Earth grew wider, but it was expensive, long, and there was no one to clean. Space was needed by the bulk of humanity, not for the sake of beauty. If there was something valuable there, everything would have been collected and recycled a long time ago. But otherwise, the tourists will worry a little. They will not lose. And when it was over, I dropped the annoying straps, pushed off the floor, stretched, and swam to the display. He's not that big from the captain's seat, but standing next to him, he's quite decent. And with 100% realism, according to the manufacturer, transmitting image quality from numerous cameras outside. There was a soft sure of overalls and rapid breathing behind me. Grisha hovered behind and stared with me at the huge gray-yellow moon plaque slowly floating to the left. But he won't bother me. He knows. I've been working here for almost 8 years, but I'll never get tired of it. The first moments in space are absolutely indescribable feelings, at least for me. Let this be just the threshold of the real cosmos. Like a small and slightly cluttered hallway in front of the entrance to the truly majestic chambers of someone huge, powerful, and, what's a sin to conceal, terrible, but when your eyes have not yet weaned themselves from earthly landscapes, and you see this blackness, which has neither edge nor bottom, the moon, completely unlike the one in the sky, the lights of distant stars and planets, willy-nilly sneaks. Inside, there appears, albeit briefly, some kind of weak and surprisingly pleasant vibration, gathering into a lump somewhere under the ribs, and soon blossoming with a slight tingling all over the body. I've never told anyone about it, maybe it's just me, but in my head I called it, "She accepted me. She let me in." Don't ask who she is. I don't have an answer, but it's definitely her. And I'm also sure that if one day I don't have this feeling, then I won't rush here anymore. So, periodically slightly correcting the course, we trudged for several hours through the solar system. The AI guided the ship to the designated point, but security protocols told it to stay as close to populated areas as possible, which is why the ship sometimes went to the left, then to the right. And I didn't bother, let him. When Jupiter appeared on the right with its steel-gray spiral rings, he froze in admiration at the display again. The huge planet was crisscrossed by several rings, uneven, dull shiny, constantly moving. At first, like the absolute majority of those who saw the planets of their native system in relative proximity, I liked Saturn more, with its well-known sombrero rings, but then I changed my point of view. Jupiter was more serious. He did not boast of his jewelry, but simply proudly and silently wore them. Nick and Grisha had long since gone to the cabin, where the former was probably shamelessly sleeping and poisoning the air with the eerie aroma of fumes. And I was still sitting on the bridge, rechecking the AI calculations and calculating the costs. It seemed that after this flight, it would be possible to either close almost 10% more of the loan, taking into account the payment of consumables and daily allowances to colleagues, or take your time there and finally put on a panoramic display. In the first year of working on contracts, still without my own ship and being hired by anyone for almost any position, I saw this from the captain of the Beatrice. And that's when I fell in love with space and decided at all costs to get my own transport with this view. The captain's name was Andrei. He was a seasoned smuggler who almost did not hide from the law because he successfully cooperated with this very law and carried very specific goods ordered by his own state, too. The risk of getting caught was not necessary for anyone, and not a small one. The same orbital patrolman from the U.S. forces would gladly have rummaged in the cargo compartments of his ship, and then sat the captain and the entire crew in the electric chair. But Andrei also took this risk accordingly, including from lawyers. But, unlike most QC, Andrei worked and risked not only and not so much for the sake of earnings, as such. No, he adored space and his Beatrice, into which he poured insane amounts for its constant improvement. At the port, everyone laughed at him when, after each flight, he walked around the ship for a long time alone, stroked it here and there, carefully examined it. And some even claimed that he was talking to Beatrice in all seriousness. No, not with AI, it was a normal thing, but with the ship. And then he would leave, frowning thoughtfully, be sure to order the washing of the entire huge carcass of the ship, and regularly tinted the scuffs, although it made no sense. The passage of the lower layers of any more or less dense atmosphere left traces on the ships. And on the first flight with him, I was stunned when Andre called me to the bridge in the pause between jumps. He despised newfangled artificial gravity devices, considering them unworthy of a real space wolf, so I then swam out of the personnel compartment, an ordinary 6x6 iron box with rows of bunks and a table in the middle, and flew onto the bridge. He looked around, at first not understanding why the walls were so strange, and froze, sighing in admiration. There were no walls. From floor to ceiling, the real space opened up, the one with a capital letter. A deep blackness with very rare and very distant sparks of light. It was strangely attractive, fettering all attention, and at the same time repulsive and awe-inspiring and awe-inspiring. I hung, it seems, for several minutes, not hearing or seeing anything around, and soon the internal lighting on the bridge turned off, and space enslaved another soul completely. I don't know how much time passed until the LEDs at the control room lit up again, and a low, somewhat rough, and at the same time understanding voice sounded. "What kid? Got caught in her net?" I shook myself, tearing myself away from the sight with incredible difficulty, ran my hand over my face and turned to the captain, smiling awkwardly. "That's right, Cap. Apologize. It's... and fell silent, unable to find words. "Well, come on, try to describe it." The interlocutor smiled maliciously. "No one has yet been able to formulate it properly from those who got into it. Some even say that I am an old fool and a romantic who has nothing else to do." "Well, you're definitely not old," I blurted out, completely without malice. "But a fool and a romantic, right?" Now, Andre couldn't help but laugh. "Come on, this is the first time I reacted the same way. Although, to tell you the truth, I still hang out like you sometimes. And if you deserve it, I'll also invite you to watch the start of the jump. I'm sure you'll like it." Oh. Have you been called? I remembered why I was there at all. And now logic said that the first thing to do was to close the loan, and only then to satisfy your desires. And the wish list rebelled, screamed and beat the dishes in my head, claiming that I always forget about them, indulging in damn rationalism and calculation. And life is going on. I've already changed my 4th decade. The internal struggle ended with the victory of the forces of procrastination. I'll get back, get the money, and then we'll see. Logic shut up and retreated to her corner, gloatingly rubbing her little hands, and the wish list became depressed and disappeared. In such cases, they always lost and knew about it. Because emotional desires must be fulfilled, or at least decisions about them must be made only under the influence of an impulse, in the moment. And if you have time to think, weigh all the pros and cons, you will never fulfill them in your life. But society has long and firmly set a course for strict logic and sequence of actions. I wonder if this is not the reason for the results of regular research that the standard of living on Earth is getting higher, and there are fewer and fewer happy people, especially among men. Doubly, especially among married people. And among the long married, such statistics were so depressingly low that some suggested thinking about psychological support for this segment of the population. I got a little angry. I didn't know why. Therefore, I took the end of the journey through the solar system with joy, hovering motionless at the screen again. The cosmos looked at me with myriad eyes, suppressed its will and seemed to gently touch something inside with cold, fluffy paws, as if checking whether this was the man who had already sworn allegiance to him once. All unnecessary thoughts were washed out of my head, leaving only a respectful awe in front of him, huge, unknown, terrible, and adored. A soft cough from behind brought me back to reality. I turned around. Nick was sitting in his armchair with a jar of freshly brewed coffee in his hand and innocently sucking it through a straw. Yes, this method is inconvenient and spoils the process, but have you tried to drink it in zero gravity in a different way? That's the same thing. And I didn't have money for artificial gravity throughout the ship. I installed it only in the kitchen, as a vital necessity. I returned to my seat and waved my head questioningly, saying, "Why did I come to wake up?" The AI also downloaded the jump routes, calculating so as not to spread a dirty silver drop with scarlet flecks on some bad comet along the way, so they could safely sleep on for half an hour. Or even more, working with small celestial bodies is an extremely difficult and fickle thing. "This, Cap, is a small request," the partner drawled in a pleading voice, looking at the ceiling. "I won't give you a loan," I snapped at once. "You won't spend it for good anyway." "No, it's much worse here," he smiled mirthlessly. "In general, let's take a look at Ross." "No problem. I've been thinking for a long time about making a minibus out of blue. So, we'll shuttle around all the planets that come in our way. Let's get rich." I even opened my eyes. "Only we need to put more places. We will still carry fellow travelers." It started. "Well, Cap, aren't we friends? I know you don't have any others." Let's say, I didn't fall for a cheap provocation. "But we are friends on Earth, outside this box. And here we are working, Nick. May it not get away from us. Well, I really need to. Do you have any idea how much fuel we will burn for landing and takeoff? And the jump engine doesn't work in the air either." "You're a selfish man, Cap." The interlocutor looked at the ceiling again and sighed heavily. "But I knew it. We don't need to land. We'll get up in orbit. I'll just look in for a few hours and that's it. I have an old friend, by the way. He's not greedy at all, like some people. I played the wedding yesterday. I'm going to give birth. And I haven't seen him for a couple of years." "A friend? Give birth?" I squinted suspiciously. "Your social circle confuses me more and more." "I'm serious. His wife is giving birth, of course. I do not communicate with those whom you are hinting at." "Well, almost. There are definitely no such friends. And okay, then deduct from my share how much we burn your fuel there." "That's better," I muttered, giving up under the unblinking plaintive gaze. "Couldn't you tell me before?" "Now we're going to recalculate everything again. We'll hang around here for another hour. Let's go on the way back then?" "Yes, I already promised him that I would be there soon, Cap." Nick continued to whine, but I couldn't before, although I didn't receive these educations of yours, but I appreciate the mental anguish of others, unlike some. I cursed and went to torment the AI of the blue again. Again, he, the poor guy, has to interrogate all the probes, stations, and then painfully creak virtual gears in an attempt to rid space of another pile of metallic synthetic debris. The blue coped faster, however. Fortunately, it was almost on the way, just 6 light-years closer. To be honest, I had the idea to dig into the network and see if there really was any passing cargo from there, but I quickly changed my mind. There will definitely be no one on the orbital station, and for the delivery of 1 pallet, my ship will not accommodate more. No one will pay as much as they will have to spend on the same takeoff and landing. Therefore, I will shake off at least some of the overspending from Nick. My conscience won't allow the whole amount, really, friends, no matter what I say. When the blue buzzed, accelerating the jump engine, all 3 of us were sitting in our seats, strapped in and focused. And Nick was staring at the display with all his eyes. He liked this moment the most. But I was indifferent. Somewhere behind him, there was a hollow guttural sound, as if a huge funnel had formed in the ocean. The ship shook. The working lighting disappeared again and the backlight of the sensors at the control panel ran. And the next moment, the picture of space on the screen blurred. The distant lights of the stars turned into a kaleidoscope of rapidly changing elongated rays. I looked to the right. Nick was sitting, leaning forward and devouring the sight with his eyes, and even, it seems, forgetting to breathe. We accelerated quite slowly, because our Orion arm still had a fair density. About an hour later, something huge, crazily bright and yellow flashed by in unpleasant proximity, and I made a note in my brain that I should wind the tail of the AI blue. It's not the case to plot a route so close to the stars. Okay, Nick, who was staring at the screen without looking up, and at that moment painfully squinted and began to wipe away tears. I don't feel sorry for him, and even the almost burnt-out cameras on the other side are also tolerable. Although, well, wow. But the attraction of that star could have time to move the ship, even by a micron, and it would have ended with a considerable probability and glorious end of us in some piece of ice in the form of a funny application. And anyway, after the last update, the AI began to behave more. Is it uninhibited? The voice suggested changing to a more soothing one, which I did not fail to use. Tried to make awkward jokes, feigned emotions. For example, when I aloud called the ship a tin can or something like that, I could not immediately respond and made my voice colder. Although, on the other hand, it's more interesting with him now, especially when the ship is in a jump, and my crew, who are drawn to call patience, is sleeping. But as for building routes and benchmarks, you definitely need to figure it out. This is not the case. Only when we got out of our native sleeve and the carcass of the blue finally stopped vibrating and throwing inertia to the left and right, I unhooked the straps and went first to the kitchen, where I had a quick snack and squatted in order to stretch the muscles degrading in weightlessness, from there to the bathroom and sleep. On the way, I gave the AI an order to entrust the management to Grisha, and in the next 6 hours do not wake me up, do not turn over, take out the first in case of a fire. That one, or that one if the voice is female, dilemma, gave a polite laugh, wished me good dreams, and blocked the front door to my cabin. I suspected that something was going wrong as soon as I opened my eyes, because I did it myself, and not under the vile bells of the alarm clock and the gentle persuasions of the blue. And it doesn't happen that way. If you don't wake me up, I can sleep for half a day in a row, which, of course, never makes me feel good, but it does interfere with contracts. The first thing I did was look at the hologram above the door, which now depicts an antique cuckoo clock. And the hope that something was wrong only with me was shattered like a crystal lampshade on sharp stones. I slept for more than 10 hours instead of the required 6. This means that we should have stopped at the Rosa orbital station a long time ago. I got out of the sleeping bag, unhooked the straps. It is not recommended to sleep without them in the absence of gravitators. Extremely painful excesses are possible. Jumped on my shoes and rushed headlong to the captain's bridge. Empty. No, the control room itself, of course, has not gone anywhere. Everything is in its place, but there was no one there, which should never happen under any circumstances. Rage boiled up inside Grisha. God forbid I find out that he had gone to sleep or for some other reason during his watch. I'll fire you right away and drop you off at the nearest inhabited point. "Psi, report," I snapped, lifting my head up. "My captain, can I be more specific?" A voice purred playfully from above. "A full report on the situation. Where are we? Who is on duty on the bridge? Where did he go? And put away your lively ways, you damn piece of iron. As soon as we get home, I'll find that imbecile who gave you the new firmware and drown him in the first puddle. Captain, threats to another person's life are unacceptable." The AI replied coldly and lifelessly. We have now passed the middle of the outer arm, moving away from the center of the galaxy. Duty Officer Grigory Lantratov left the control room 8 hours and 27 minutes ago, handing over control to Nikolai Samoshnikov. "Where are they both?" I growled. "Pick them up and drag them here, even if they have unstoppable diarrhea." Grigory Lantratov is asleep. I tried to wake him up, but I couldn't. Nikolai Samoshnikov urgently left the ship 5 hours and 4 minutes ago. I shook my head, ran my hands over my face, pinched himself. No, I'm not sleeping, but this is nonsense. Blue, we're in a jump. How could someone leave the ship? Run diagnostics. Unlock the door to the mate's cabin. The voice above said something in agreement and disappeared. The light blinked, and I rushed to the cabin, where I took out the taser, which had been hanging in the locker since the devil knows when, and rushed down the corridor. Flying into Grisha's cabin, I saw him in his cocoon, fast asleep and smiling at something. That's all. Nick wasn't there. To check, he poked the assistant's body with his foot without reaction, and went on. The kitchen is empty, the bathroom is empty. But this is nonsense, it doesn't happen that way. If Nick had jumped out of the ship, he would have been instantly smeared, crushed into molecules, even if he had the most sophisticated spacesuit, which, of course, were not and could not be on the Blue. And this is even without taking into account the fact that he would not even be able to open the floodgates. The ship's protocols would not allow it. And we didn't come out of the jump. I would definitely have woken up. I couldn't shake Grisha, so I still used a shocker. The smile on the sleeping face was replaced by a painful grin. The body stretched out into a string and twitched several times. But it helped. "Gray, did you fall from the moon?" He croaked when he came to his senses. "What are you doing?" "What the fuck are you sleeping for, freak? Where the fuck is Nick?" I yelled, grabbing him by the breasts. Wait, don't shake, my head is falling off," groaned Grisha, pulled his hands out of the case and grabbed the back of his head. "Blue, report," I repeated. "No miracle happened, or, on the contrary, as you look at it." The AI repeated the same thing as a few minutes earlier, and Grisha's eyes, as he listened to the report, became closer in size to the tea saucers. "Brother, Cap," he began to mutter when the report was over. "I don't understand a damn thing. It's impossible. Captain, may I?" The voice of the Blue sounded dryly. "What?" "I suggest you watch the recording from the control room. I don't see what happened in the cabins, but the cameras in the common areas are working, I want to remind you. You're coming with me, then you'll be sick." I barked at Grisha, who winced in pain, but obediently nodded and began to climb out of his cocoon. The further we watched the recording, the paler my partner turned. And so do I suspect. I also felt ashamed, and it hurts excruciatingly somewhere there between the ribs. Grisha quite conscientiously kept his watch for the first hour. Then Nick joined him. Then Nick treated him to his signature coffee. And after a couple of minutes, Grisha was barely aware of what was happening, falling asleep on the move, and handed over control to the only awake crew member, who, like an old time-tested friend, helped his senior comrade get to the cabin and even wrapped him in a sleeping bag and carefully fastened him. And he immediately got into control of the ship, canceling my alarm clock and the intermediate braking at Ross, replacing it with a smooth deceleration to the jump speed at which an emergency discharge of the cargo compartment is possible. I wouldn't have been able to believe what was happening if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But I myself, with my own hands, had long ago given full access to the control of the ship to both Nick and Grisha, as the only friends I trusted completely. Although he could, like all normal captains, entrust only the course correction insurance system. And soon Nick, along with the cargo compartment, broke the docking with the ship, having done this approximately in the area of the red dwarf Ross 128, where he's sure to be fished out soon by some truck with a seizure. I don't understand what he was counting on, Grisha muttered dully, looking at the floor. There is also a video and all its data and logs. He's a dumb little degenerate. I gritted my teeth. I'm going to smear him, roll him on the floor, bastard. Sigh! I'm listening, Captain. Turn off the jump engine and brake. We're turning around. I confirmed the stop of the G engine, and immediately the steady hum behind changed the key, adding whistling notes. Braking and U-turn are not confirmed. I don't understand. I raised my head and looked at the ceiling. Why is that all of a sudden? Me, Captain, this one, vessels. That's right, Captain. If you suspect that Nikolai Samoshnikov has changed something in the management priorities, then you are wrong. He remained a junior assistant. He does not have access rights to change the owner and captain. Then why the hell can't we stop and turn around, Blue? I barked furiously. Emergency undocking of the cargo compartment in jump mode damaged the control circuits of the deflected directional nozzles. I'm sorry, Captain. You can't be sorry, stupid. But he quickly fell silent. AI definitely has nothing to do with it. How can they be repaired? Cap, Grisha said, we're in the jump. It's impossible. You know as well as I do. Captain, we can stop using the reverse thrust of the G engine. The AI intervened again. And then it will be possible to manually restore control, but it's forbidden, Captain. Why? Because when the fourth control circuit is manually unlocked, unprocessed lithium-7 will be discharged from all the nozzles, which is likely to ignite instantly. You understand, Captain, what will happen there. I'm a dumb piece of hardware, but in your folklore this is usually called a fiery hell, from which there will not be a single opportunity to get out in time, and not a single spacesuit will be able to protect. There was a heavy, oppressive silence. I leaned back in my chair and stared blankly at the ceiling, realizing that this was all. Someone was right when he said that a person is often ruined by his love. Of course, even at the very beginning of my career as a QC, I was aware that space is treacherous, and even now, ships sometimes break down, and unexpected and unpredictable obstacles may arise on jump routes, and thousands more reasons why the life of a person who linked his fate with flights between planets and the stars may end much sooner than he expects. But I never thought that it would get to me, especially in this form. How could he? Grisha whispered faintly from the side. We tried it. The man has an ideal business reputation. And then he was with us for another 6 years, not a single joint. After all, there was a real friend. I introduced him to my family, and my dad almost called him his son, and he betrayed us because of some cargo. He killed us. I don't know, old man. I exhaled, continuing to stare at the white ceiling. It doesn't fit in my head either. But he, the bastard, knew everything in advance. That's why he so easily agreed to take the cargo instead of us. And he didn't just mention a friend on the do either, but to land there himself. A friend. His brother has been working at the mine there for several years, and I know all his friends besides those present here. There is exactly one person, and that one is on Earth. It doesn't matter anymore. I finally made a decision and started to get up. You're wrong about one thing. He didn't kill us. What are you talking about? Grisha turned to me. He didn't kill us both. We are now in the outer sleeve. After the turnaround, there will definitely not be enough fuel to get home, but the Blue will reach the inhabited places. You will give an SOS signal there. Someone will catch you. What did you think of that for? There was a note of panic in the other's voice. Grish, let's not do this so it's shitty. There's no point in both of them dying if you can get by with the death of one. Is it logical? It makes sense. And which of the two of us is more needed there, on Earth? I think it's not a question either. You have a wife, a son, parents, and I have no one. I could have added how ashamed I still was that I suspected him of betrayal, but I couldn't. But he seriously sometimes calls me brother, especially when drunk, when lying is the hardest thing. Gray, you are this. Cut it out. We'll shout save on all the waves, you see, someone will respond. That's enough. I raised my voice. No one is here, and won't be for the next 20 years, Grish. And if the signal from here reaches inhabited places by some miracle, it will take even longer. That's it, old man. I'm the captain, and I make the decisions. Sai! Yes, Captain? A voice from above asked, coldly and politely. I'm sorry for yelling. I've never said it, and I won't say it again, but I love you. Prepare my spacesuit and the escape exit, and give me instructions on how to do something there. The decision I made fell like a multi-ton weight on my shoulders, bending them down. My heart was throbbing in a strange and terrible longing, but I tried to keep my voice cheerful and my back straight. Seryoja. There was a soft voice behind him. I turned and looked at Grisha. I'm going to go. Why the fuck would that be? I was surprised. Sit down, Walker. You have a family, I'm telling you again. I'm the captain here, which means I'm responsible for both the ship and the crew, and for the actions of some of the crew members, Grish. Gray, I have made a decision, and I won't change it. If necessary, I'll tie you up and go. His comrade's voice, always calm and lazily drawling, was unusually full of emotion and strength. Brother, don't bother me, please. I've made my decision. Take another one. How will I look into your eyes if I come back without you? I started screaming. You're talking nonsense, you old fool. Come back home, where they are waiting for you. Believe me, Kat and Dimka are unlikely to worry much about this, if only because they will lose their income, but nothing. The ship will be sold. Oh, by the way, I haven't told anyone yet. I ordered myself the same breakthrough as this one. It will be ready next week. I was going to invite everyone to visit. I opened my mouth, intending to continue yelling, but Grisha made a sign to shut up, and I obeyed. Because this Grisha was completely different, as I had never seen him. He was not a downtrodden, weak-willed, henpecked man, but someone no one would want to argue with. And be sure to find Nick. I'll give the Blue the data on his brother. For sure he went to him. That one is generally marginal, even managed to serve time they will now match. And I also wondered how two such different children could be in the same family. Okay, that's the lyrics. So, Gray, you come back and I'll fix your carriage. You wouldn't have done a damn thing there anyway. Your hands are growing out of your ass. There is only one request. You keep an eye on mine out of the corner of your eye. Don't let them disappear. They are helpless at all. And stop fooling around yourself. Find yourself a normal woman and start a family. But you walk like a fool, so that no one would be upset about my death later too, I said dully, looking down at the floor. So, I'm saying you're a fool. It's Katya, like that now. And then Grisha put his hand on his chest. She was still that freckled and funny girl, at the very sight of whom her breath was coming down, and fiery goosebumps ran all over her body. Or the one, when making love, with whom I was going crazy and couldn't get enough of her. You, with yours, have never dreamed of this, believe me. Because you fuck, and we loved each other, giving ourselves completely to the very bottom. Grisha always straightened his stooped back before his eyes. A blush bloomed on his pale cheeks, and his voice was already rumbling. And I want her to stay that way for me. Do you understand, Captain? So that in my last moments I remember not how she yells at me, but how pregnant she is, pregnant with my child. And funny as a penguin, she roared into her pillow at night because she wanted salted crackers and pickled pineapples of the brand Uncle Vanya. But she did not wake me up, because her beloved has to work in the morning. It was then that she became the way you know her, but it was my own fault. I thought she'd go crazy, postpartum depression and all that, and then it was too late. But I tried to get in. Shut up, Gray, let me talk. He cut off my attempt. And Dimka, he is now a 100-kilogram boar who does not put his father in anything. And I remembered him as a squeaking lump weighing 3,700, which pulled tiny paws towards me and loved to fall asleep in my arms. Or a 7-year-old whirlwind meteor who secretly told his grandfather that his folder was the best, strongest, and most beautiful in the world, and that he will always be with me because he loves the folder so much that if his love could weigh, it would be heavier even than that tractor over there. And believe me, Seryoja, I am wildly, insanely happy that I had all this. And I wish you to experience the same thing. And then everything is in your hands, an example of how not to, you know? You can never be really happy if you don't really love someone at least once. Grisha obviously quoted someone. Grish, I managed to say. An uninvited lump rose in my throat. Something got into my eyes, forcing me to look at the ceiling. Shut up, Grish. Do you remember our first contract? I shook my head. The only thing I have left in my head since that time is the ecstasy that overwhelmed me. And then I asked you not to call me Grisha. I've hated it since childhood. If you really want to shorten my name, then at least Greg. And you nodded and immediately forgot. The cattle are small. Why didn't you remind me later? You saw that I was not adequate. Come on, it was already uncomfortable. But this is nonsense in general. Actually, you're a good guy, Gray. I would also tell you the same thing that you only told Blue that, but you will get over it. Do you understand now why I'm going? I looked up at him and, against my will, nodded in agreement. Or perhaps it was the part that I always carefully hid deep inside that did it for me, and which was immediately ready for such a turn, or even dreamed of it. Yes, I am the captain, and I am responsible for my crew as well, but I also want to live, it turns out. At least that part inside. Every year, it gets harder for me to remember what they were like. And I want in my last moments to remember those whom I really loved and love. And also, I want to finally decide for myself what and how I do it. At least, let me die a man. Grisha was going to do it in a completely different way than people who are going to die should do it. He was cheerful, active, and loud, even when he dictated the will in front of the cameras and confirmed it with an electronic signature. He did it with a smile. And I sat in my seat and looked at him with admiration. I liked this Grisha much more. I never knew my father, but now I definitely have an example. And when he left, after hugging me tightly and ordering me not to hang my nose, I sobbed, although I hadn't allowed myself to do this since I was 6 years old. The rear cameras showed how a silvery figure appeared in their field of view, waved at me, and flew up to the first nozzle. I fiddled there for about 30 minutes, pushed off, pointed with my fingers, "It's okay," and headed for the second one. Only near the last, fourth contour of the grease. Greg tinkered much longer, spending more than an hour. And I didn't know what I wanted more for him to succeed, or for him not to succeed. But soon he turned around, holding one hand from behind, and began to show something with the other. Letters. J, G, Ray, G. Then turned away and... The cameras instantly dimmed when they were illuminated by a flash of flaring lithium-7, which covered part of the space behind the ship with a huge cloud. Blue! I raised my tearful face up when the ship's carcass turned around and headed towards the inhabited part of space. Yes, Captain? Replace your own name in the system with Greg.